We're going to continue to talk about the laws of Shabbat. So today I want to talk to you about the issue of telling a goy, to do something for you, some melacha, some labor, right? So the truth is, the Chazal teach us that that they decreed, not to tell a goy to do melacha for you, not to do any labor for you on Shabbat, even though he's allowed to do. Right? The goy doesn't have to keep Shabbat. He's not allowed to keep Shabbat. But the thing is, they were afraid if you tell the goy to do it, you'll come to do it too, maybe. So they're going to get confused. So therefore they made a rule like this, gezerah, don't tell a goy to do melacha on Shabbat. Right? So if that's the case, right, how do we have what they have in Ashkenazim? They call that Shabbos goy. Shabbos goy. Right? What is that? Shabbat goy. Right? He comes, to the house. They hire him. They pay him. He stays there for Shabbat, and he does, for them all kinds of things. All kinds of laborers, all kinds of help, all kinds of service. He does for them. How do they do that? But we said, right, it's not allowed to tell a goy to do labor. So how does he do that? This is the question, right? So the truth is, that even if you do have a Shabbos goy, a Shabbat goy, it doesn't mean you can tell him to do everything for you. You don't have a carte blanche, a blank check, you can tell him, whatever you want to do. No, it doesn't work like that. So what is a goy allowed to do? Basically, right, a Shabbos goy, Shabbat goy, he's allowed to do, number one, he's allowed to do things which are rabbinical, rabbinical prohibitions from the rabbis. This we allow him to do, Only something which is from the Torah he's not allowed to do, right? Labor from the Torah, That's a different thing. For instance, the goy wants to cook for you, on Shabbat. Are you allowed to? No, this is from the Torah, So you gotta tell him, listen, don't cook over here, I don't want you cooking for me on Shabbat. I'm not allowed to eat anyway, you're not allowed to eat food which was cooked by a goy. That's also another thing, right? There's also another problem there. So two problems you got. But anyway, right, that's the issue there. So things which are rabbinical, he's allowed to do. So let's talk a little about the details of this, What about if you didn't tell him, the goy, right, to do nothing for you, but he did for you anyway, he did for you melacha. He did for you labor on Shabbat. Are you allowed to accept it? Are you allowed to use it? Get benefit from it? This is the question, right? So as we said, right, if it's from the Torah what he did, you're not allowed to use that, get benefit from that at all. So if he did something for you, you can't use it. Because he did it for you. Even though you didn't tell him nothing, he's my Shabbos goy, he does whatever he wants, Yeah, okay, but he did it for you. What does it matter? You didn't tell him, but he did it for you. So therefore, you're not allowed to use that. But if it's something which is from the rabbis, right, rabbinical prohibition, you're allowed to use that, from a goy. Two different things, right? It's not the same thing at all. Two different things altogether. Another thing is like this, It says in the Shulchan Aruch, what about if the goy did it for himself? Can you use that? Get benefit from it? So the answer is yes. Since he did it for himself, he didn't do it for you. It shows, right, whatever he did, he did it for himself. So that you're allowed to use on Shabbat. He didn't do it for you. That's something else, right? Interesting thing, right, comes up like this. Let's say you have like a mixed group, of people. Some goyim, some Jews, right? Mixed 50-50, whatever, something like that, right? And the goy went and did melacha, for everybody. He did. Are you allowed to use it? So it says in the Shulchan Aruch, if the majority of the people over there are goyim, you're allowed to use it. Because that means he did it basically for the goyim, Mainly for the goyim he did. If the majority is Jews, you're not allowed to use that, right? Because he did it for the Jews. So it depends on the majority.
So if they're making barbecue, you
Yeah.
can join them?
Wait a second. Who's making the barbecue?
Good.
Right. So if he didn't do it for you, he didn't. Yeah, you can eat that. Did you know that? It's interesting, right? He didn't cook it for you. He did it for himself. But the thing is, you're not allowed to cook anyway. Something that was cooked by a goy. So you got another problem. Even on Yom Chol, you cannot eat something that was cooked by a goy. So there are different rules about that. All kinds of details. I'm not going to get that now. We're not going to talk about that. But if he cooked for you, right? Let's say he made something. You're not allowed to eat that. He's cooked by a goy. Food cooked by a goy.
Some people now inviting professional cooks, let's say for a barbecue, or say they're making a fire, let's say they have no time for do it.
Right.
So they hired some Muslim or some goy to
Right, right.
Shabbat and everything.
Oh, nice. Okay, so here's the thing, right? If you're gonna do it this way, bring a goy, to be your chef, right? You got a goy chef, So what you gotta do is there's two different minhagim, right? The Ashkenazim do one way, we do a different way. Ashkenazim, what they do is if the Jew lit the fire, the goy can cook, after.
Yeah.
That's what the Ashkenazim do.
Yes.
They do. So all the restaurants over here,
Yes.
which are under the vad, that's what they do, in most places. There are some places which do like the Sephardi way, because they want to get Sephardi customers, So they do it, the Sephardi way. But most places, Ashkenazi restaurants, they do like the Ashkenazi way. The Jew comes in the morning, lights the fire, right? And the goy cooks all day over there, everything. Every day he cooks all day. You understand? That's the way it is. Every day the Jew comes in the morning and just lights the fire and goes home. You understand? That's the way it is. So, different minhag, right? But by our minhag, the Sfaradim, we don't do like that. So what do? It has to be, right, that you placed the food on the fire, and then the goy finished it. This is okay, Or let's say he placed it and you flipped it, right? So you also helped to cook, you flipped. So if you do it if you help him with the cooking, that's okay,
Does it has to be done by Mashgiach or any?
That's any Jew, any kosher Jew, right? Religious Jew. Shomer Shabbat, right? Not those guys who drive on Shabbat. Not those guys. Right? We're not talking about those guys. Okay, so that's that's the thing, right? So, as we said, right, you can tell a goy, so it depends. If he did it for you, as we said, right? If he didn't do it for you, it's a different thing altogether. But as we said, right, there's a group of Jews and goyim, so we say go according to the majority. But it says in Shulchan Aruch like this, even let's say the majority is Jews, there's only a little bit goyim over there, 2 or 3 goyim, and there's like 20 Jews, over there. So majority is Jews, right? I'm sorry, just the opposite, right? The majority is goyim. I didn't say it right. The majority is goyim, 20 goyim and 3 Jews, whatever. So we're the minority, right? Miut. We're the miut. So as we said, right, you cannot enjoy that, you cannot get benefit from it. But if we see, right, that the goy, by his action, even though the majority over there is Jews, we see by his action that he's doing it also for himself. So I'll give you an example, right? We had this case several years ago when I first came to America, right, over there in the shul there, right, in the Georgian shul, they had this goy working there, a Muslim guy,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
What's his name? I forgot his name. Whatever. Anyway. Anyway, the point is, right, that we had this guy working there. So, people saw him on Shabbat. He comes in, you know what I mean? And he takes a hot water urn, like those things, and he adds water on Shabbat, because everybody's drinking, so it's not enough. So he has to add more. So people came to me, and they said, Rabbi, this guy is adding water on Shabbat. Right? So they told me, they said, he's doing it for us, so Likora, not allowed to drink from that. He's doing it for us, right? But here's the thing, right? We found out that what he does is that he also takes a drink himself, when he puts it in, he also takes,
Yeah.
So in a case like this, I told him, I said, it's okay, it says in the Shulchan Aruch like that. It says in the Chazon Ovadia also, Maran Ovadia Lashon. He also writes, that if you see, right, that the goy is using also for himself, when he does something, you can use it. Why? Because that shows, that he did it for himself. Even though it's also for the Jews, the majority is Jews, but you see, right, by his action, what he did. You see what the situation was, right? So it really depends, right? As we said, how the situation goes, right, with these things. Yeah, Mechila.
You can tell a goy turn on the incarnation on Shabbat.
Good question, right? We just spoke about this like a few days ago. We talked about doing it with a shaun, with a clock, right, with a timer, right?
All the lights,
So can you tell the goy to? Yeah. So here's the thing, right? All these things, air conditioner, and also other appliances, electric. They're not from the Torah, these prohibitions. These are from the rabbis. Air conditioner is not from the Torah. So therefore, you can definitely tell a goy, to turn on the air conditioner, to turn off the air conditioner. Yes, you can tell him. It's not from the Torah. Huh?
Everything that's related to electricity.
Not everything. So here, let's make a chiluk, right? Let's make a
No, I
differentiation.
thought you said everything.
Not everything, several things. But there are things, which are from the Torah. As we spoke about 2 things, right? If you remember, a couple of days ago, we spoke about the plata, and we spoke about the dishwasher, right? Are they from the Torah or from the rabbis? These 2. This is from the Torah. You know why? Because the dishwasher, what does it do? It boils the water, right? It's cooking the water. This is from the Torah. That's something else. Cooking, bishul. Right? Plata, right, is also, there's gufei chimum, you know, those right, what do they call those, right? Those heating element, right? It's right under the plata there. It's right under the top, right? Those heating elements, they get hot like fire, you know, and they cook. They can cook, and they also get cooked. The heating element gets cooked itself, you know. So those are from the Torah, you know. So you cannot tell a goy to put a dishwasher or to do the heating element, right? To do the plata, no. To turn on the plata, this you cannot do, right? Because it's from the Torah. But air conditioner is from the rabbis, you know. So therefore, it's okay, no problem, right? Not the same thing. One thing is different. By the way, this is what we said. If you remember last time, right? I told you that Maran Rabbi Yoshem, he doesn't like, you know, putting the air conditioner on timer, right? I'm sorry, not the air conditioner, the dishwasher, right, on timer. You know why that is? We said, right? Sometimes you close the door, you know, and it starts by itself. Remember we spoke about this. So here's the thing, right? When you close the door, you're cooking that water. You know, it's from the Torah. You know, so that's also the one reason why the rabbi didn't like that, because it's from the Torah. You know, when you close that door and it starts working right away. You're doing a melacha d'oraita, cooking the water. So this is no good, right? This is the reason why I didn't like doing that. So you see the difference, right? It depends if it's the Rabbanan or the Oraita, right? Each thing has its own rule, you know, has its own, has its own din. So that's the way it is, right? I wanted to tell you also some more stuff about this. Okay, so here's another thing, right? Which is that there's also a difference between the Ashkenazim and Sfaradim in one thing, right? It says in the Ramah, brings the Ramah down there, that the Ashkenazim are lenient, you know, if they don't have a light, you know, to eat Seudah, you know, a nair, you know, candles, right? Because in those days it was candles, right? They didn't have electricity, right? So they would tell the goy, they had a minhag like this, you know, in the Ashkenazi, in Europe, they would bring the goy and tell him to light the candles. Lighting candles from the Torah, from the rabbis. From the Torah, it's a fire, esh, right? So then how do they do that? So there is another opinion, you know, that they relied on. You know, it's a minority opinion. Balai tu. You know what he says to Balai tu? If it's davar mitzvah, if it's something in the mitzvah, you can tell the goy to do, even if it's from the Torah. So they say, you know, lighting a light for the seudah is a mitzvah. You don't want to eat in the dark, you know, it's like some kind of crazy man, you know, something a madman. They say it's davar mitzvah. But the Ramah says over there, you know what he says? Even though the minhag by them, you know, was to be lenient about this, but he says better not to be lenient. You know, he says, even the Ramah, the Rabbi of Ashkenazim, he says, don't be lenient. But by us, you know, by the Sfaradim, we were never lenient about this. You know, we were always stringent because it's from the Torah. You know, lighting again. But here's the thing now, right? If you have LED lights, right? LEDs. Most of us have LEDs now, you know, because they save money, you know. Or even fluorescent, right? So are those from the Torah or from the rabbis? Those are from the rabbis. This is not real ish, you know, over there. So therefore, if you have LED or even fluorescent, right, you can tell a goy to light it because it's not from the Torah. These things, only a real ner, you know, right? Candle. That's something else. I'm not talking about that today. Who lights candles, right? Just, you know, for Shabbat we light candles, right? Before Shabbat, right? Erev Shabbat we light candles, but we don't light candles, you know, especially for the Seudah. You know what I mean? Like on Shabbat, you know, something like that. Nobody does that. So that's the thing, you know. So therefore, if you have LED or fluorescent, you can tell the goy to light it, even according to Sfaradim. No problem, you know. It's not from the Torah. This, you know how the LED, you know how the fluorescent works. By the way, how does it work? The fluorescent light. By the way, fluorescent is very old. You know, I remember when I was a child, we had that. You know, when I used to go to school, they had fluorescent lights because it saves money. You know, it's cheaper than the old one, the incandescent. You know, so that's why they used to use it in the school. But now we have the LED. LED saves even more money, you know. So fluorescent now is going out of style, right? It's like almost extinct. Nobody wants to use fluorescent anymore because LED is much cheaper, much better. You know, what do you need it for, fluorescent? So, but there is still fluorescent in the market. You know, there is some fluorescent. How does the fluorescent work? You know how it works? I'll explain to you something interesting. This bulb, right? Long bulb, whatever it is, right? It's like a fluorescent. It has a gas in there, you know? There's a gas.
Yeah.
You know, right?
Yes.
There's no fire, there's no ash over there. So what happens is, that there's like a starter there, a starter. Like, you have a starter in your car. There's also a starter over there. So when you turn on the fluorescent, you know what happens? That starter gives off sparks. And it makes the gas glow. This is how the fluorescent works. Understand? So now, right, there's a discussion. Is this from the Torah or from the rabbis? So the truth is, the poskim, achronim, they say that sparks is not from the Torah. It's from the rabbis. Sparks. In Totut. The Ben Ish Chai writes that. Right? And also many other chachamim. Maran Ovadia Mishom, he also writes that sparks is not from the Torah. You know why? Because it has no makor. It doesn't have any source. It just goes out right away, It's not a real fire. Yeah, Mechila.
You create all. You create light.
Yeah, for sure.
You
Yeah.
cannot do even that with followers.
But
אתה בורא, וזה היה תפקיד של הקדוש.
the poskim say, that the sparks, the poskim say the sparks is from the rabbis.
You bore all. You create light.
Don't argue with the gedolim. Don't argue with the chachamim. Not a good idea, right? So as we said, right, this is so fluorescent is not from the Torah because there's sparks over there, right, and it lights up the gas. The gas is not a fire; it's glowing, right? Because how do you know, by the way, that gas is not a fire? Because there's no oxygen in there, in that bulb. So how is it burning? To have a fire, you need oxygen, How is it burning? So you see from there, it's not a real fire, There are some rabbis, by the way, they want to say, there is a little bit machloket, They want to say that fluorescent is from the Torah. There are some chachamim like this, but I think they're mistaken. But for sure, right, one thing I can tell you, the LED is not from the Torah. There everybody agrees. LED is not from the Torah. It's not a real fire. So therefore, that's what I tell people always, if you have a house, right, and you want to keep Shabbat, change all your bulbs, get everything LED. You know why? Because it's not, it's not a real ash, so if by mistake somebody turns it on, he didn't do melacha. You know what I mean? He doesn't have to bring a korban, in the Bet HaMikdash, because he turned on LED. It's not that severe, That's the thing, Mechila.
What about the phone?
Huh?
What about the phone on Shabbat? You touch it.
I'll tell you something interesting. We'll finish here. I don't want to go too long. One time I was in the house, one big chacham, invited me. He was my good friend. Dayan, Posek, big chacham. So he used to invite me for Shabbat sometimes, I used to go there. Great time with this guy. Talking all the time, Divrei Torah, He's Adam Gadol, Chacham Gadol. So one time, his son was there when I came for Shabbat. And he asked his father, he says, Abba, he says, is the phone really, something, asur, in Shabbat to use a phone? So you know what happened, right? The rabbi didn't answer him. You know what he did? He asked me, he said, what do you say, Rabbi? He told me to answer. You understand? Because he wasn't sure. He didn't know so much about it, So I told him, I said, the truth is, that there's nothing from the Torah in the phone, for sure, There's no ash over there, there's no fire. Yeah? Michtav. What do you say about that? But you know what they say, the Chazal, right? That michtav, only if it lasts, it's asur. But something which is temporary is mutar, michtav. It's not the same thing. Anyway, different discussion for a different day. We'll talk about that, Bezat Hashem, some other time. It says in Chazal Avadia, yeah, michtav, yeah. So anyway, right, we're not worried about the michtav. We're not worried about the writing because it's not real writing. It just disappears, in a few seconds. It's not permanent. What's permanent? It has to last at least one day. If it lasts one day, it's called permanent. But anyway, it's not real writing anyway because you're not writing it, But the point is like this, right? I want to tell you. The phone, there's nothing from the Torah over there. So therefore, for sure, right, it's from the rabbis. The maximum. I'm not even sure about that, by the way. But I'll tell you one thing. If, the rabbis would say the phone is mutar, you know what's going to happen? We're going to lose Shabbat. We're not going to have Shabbat anymore. You know why? Because everybody's going to go, with his phone and play with his phone all Shabbat. He's not going to come to Seudah. He's not going to come to synagogue. It's going to destroy Shabbat. I tell you. If you want to use these phones on Shabbat, be careful. Be careful what you say about those phones.
You're right.
Watch out. Okay. So that's the thing, with the phones. Watch out. That's a dangerous, right, contraption, that phone. Dangerous, But it's for sure not from the Torah, right? That's for sure, So therefore, right, as we said, right, if you need to tell a goy. I'll tell you one thing and we'll stop here. I'm sorry, Mechila. I remember, one of my relatives was giving birth, going to the hospital.
Yeah.
So she asked me if I go on Shabbat, if it comes on Shabbat, right, the birth. Can I use my phone, to call a cab? I said, for sure you can use it. There's no question. There's no. It's not a prohibition from the Torah. I'm sorry.
She's allowed to drive.
Yeah, but she doesn't drive, right? So But by the way, it's better to take a goy. That's what the poskim say.
Yeah.
When you're giving birth, better to call a goy cab. I've had this, by the way, twice in my family. Every time we called the goy cab. That's what we did. He drove us to the hospital because my rabbi told me like that. To call a goy.
So many of
Yeah, Okay, whatever. So anyway, right? But if you don't have a goy, you can drive yourself. You're right, of course. Yeah, of course, no question. But anyway, the point is, right, that I told her, I said, for sure, yeah, you're allowed to use the phone, if you need, because you're going to the hospital to give birth. ברוך ה' לעולם, אמן ואמן. רבי חנן המקשר אומר, רצה הקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות ישראל, לפי חלקי בא להם תורה ומצוות שנאמר אדוני חפש, למען צדקו יגדיל תורה בידי.